The year is 2157. In the silence of deep space, where only the echoes of dying stars persist, humanity continues its search for the unknown. NASA, now a transformed interplanetary research conglomerate, launched its latest mission months ago. Officially, the mission was classified as a scientific exploration of moons in the Saturn system. Unofficially, it was something far greater. The Ecliptica, one of the most advanced spacecraft ever built, was sent to Sector X-37, a remote point in the galaxy. Little was known about the location except for one disturbing detail. A gravitational anomaly had been detected there for decades. A unique energy signature, recorded by probes 72 years earlier, had never been explained. Reports suggested something monumental might be lurking there. However, records about the mission were vague, protected by layers of security that even the engineers who built the spacecraft couldn't fully understand. Inside the spacecraft, Dr. Alara Voss, a renowned astrophysicist, was fixated on the holographic monitors in the main laboratory. Blurred but clearly disturbing images displayed fragments of data collected by the probes. She noticed energy patterns that seemed artificial. Regular gravitational undulations and rhythms defied natural explanation. The silence in the room was broken only by the hum of the equipment and the muffled sound of her breathing, which grew heavier as she analyzed. The numbers. The mission commander, Jarek Nolan, entered, carrying 2 cups of coffee. A pragmatic man with decades of experience in high-risk missions, he observed Alara for a moment before approaching. "You've been at this for hours. You need to rest. We'll approach the anomaly tomorrow morning. Until then, shut it all down." Alara took the cup but kept her eyes fixed on the data. "It's not that simple, Jarek. Something is wrong here. These numbers, these readings aren't just anomalies. It's like they're being manipulated. This can't be natural." She pointed at the patterns on the screen. "Look how they repeat at exact intervals. Gravity doesn't do that. Not without help." Jarek sighed and took a sip of his coffee. "We'll figure it out. But for now, you need to sleep. I've ordered the team to keep the systems in observation mode. We'll decide how to proceed tomorrow." The next morning, the Ecliptica adjusted its trajectory, cautiously approaching the anomaly. The lights inside the spacecraft were dim, creating an atmosphere of tension. Silence was broken when the first images appeared on the monitors in the command room. "Oh my God," murmured Alara, her eyes wide. On the screen, the object floated, in the void of space. It had the shape of a colossal monolith, its surface irregular and seemingly in constant flux as if it were alive. Geometric patterns moved across its surface, emitting a bluish glow. It was impossible to determine if the material was metallic, liquid, or something entirely unknown. "This is a structure," said Lila Moreau, the team linguist, leaning closer to the monitors. "The patterns, they look like a form of writing. This isn't natural. It was made by something." The readings intensified. The energy emanating from the structure was so powerful that it caused the Ecliptica's systems to fail. Lights flickered, monitors froze. Aiko Ren, the chief engineer, struggled to stabilize the circuits. "We're overloading. This thing is directly affecting our systems." Before they could react, a transmission was received. It was a rhythmic frequency like a pulsar, but there was something more. A voice, broken by static, could be heard. "If anyone is listening, they lied about everything. It's not safe." The transmission ended abruptly. On Earth, Evan Blake, an investigative journalist who had managed to infiltrate NASA's communication channels, was in his apartment when the transmission began to send to an anonymous address. He opened the file, incredulous. The images showed the same structure NASA's probes were investigating, but there was more. Old photographs, dated 1985, showed the same monolith. Beside them, classified documents contained only one repeated phrase: Aegis classification, maximum security. Back in space, the team aboard the Ecliptica faced new challenges. The structure began to emit a gravitational pulse, creating a field around it. Drones sent to collect data simply vanished as they crossed the boundary of the field. But in their brief operational moments, one of the drones captured something else. A humanoid figure, translucent, walking inside the monolith. "That's impossible," said Nolan, watching the repeated images on the screen. "There's no life there. There can't be." "What if we're wrong?" asked Alara, her voice tense. "What if what we're seeing is something beyond life as we know it?" On Earth, Evan discovered that Project Aegis had been part of a secret military operation. During the Apollo missions, NASA had detected a signal similar to the one coming from the structure, but all evidence had been covered up. What did they know? Why hide something so monumental? Back in space, the monolith began to change. Its surface, previously static, now seemed to open. An intense light emanated from its interior while the gravitational field around it intensified. The Ecliptica began to be pulled toward the structure and the team panicked. "We're being dragged in," shouted Aiko. "Engines can't hold us." Nolan ordered an emergency maneuver, but it was too late. The ship was engulfed by the monolith. When the environment stabilized, what they saw on the other side was indescribable. They were inside a space that defied all laws of physics. The sky was a mix of colors that didn't exist on Earth, and impossible structures extended in all directions. The voice echoed again, this time clearer. "Welcome. You've crossed the threshold. The choice has been made. Judgment begins now." Inside the monolith, the Ecliptica's crew faced a reality that seemed to defy everything they had ever known. The environment around them was a fusion of impossible geometry and pulsating colors that moved in synchronized rhythms, as if the very space they occupied was alive. The ground beneath their feet was translucent, emitting a faint glow, and appeared to stretch infinitely in all directions. Massive towers and arches loomed in the distance, rotating slowly in the void. The sky, if it could even be called that, was a swirling canvas of auroras in colors that human eyes could barely process. The voice continued to echo in their minds, soft but authoritative. "You have crossed the threshold. The choice has been made. Judgment begins now." Ilara looked at Commander Nolan, searching for answers in his eyes. "Judgment? What judgment? Who is judging us?" Her voice trembled, but she tried to maintain her composure. Nolan, however, was frozen in a mixture of awe and fear. Inside the monolith, the Ecliptica's crew faced a reality that seemed to defy everything they had ever known. The environment around them was a fusion of impossible geometry and pulsating colors that moved in synchronized rhythms, as if the very space they occupied was alive. The ground beneath their feet was translucent, emitting a faint glow, and appeared to stretch infinitely in all directions. Massive towers and arches loomed in the distance, rotating slowly in the void. The sky, if it could even be called that, was a swirling canvas of auroras in colors that human eyes could barely process. The voice continued to echo in their minds, soft but authoritative. "You have crossed the threshold. The choice has been made. Judgment begins now." Ilara looked at Commander Nolan, searching for answers in his eyes. "Judgment? What judgment? Who is judging us?" Her voice trembled, but she tried to maintain her composure. Nolan, however, was frozen in a mixture of awe and fear. This can't be real," muttered Aiko, frantically checking his suit's systems. "The sensors are picking up readings that don't make sense. There's no real gravity here, but we're standing. And this light, it's not any kind of energy we've ever encountered." Lila, still captivated by the patterns of light and symbols pulsating on the translucent walls, whispered, "This is a language, a form of communication. They're trying to speak to us." She reached out, her fingers brushing against the nearest wall, which immediately reacted by projecting a series of holograms into the air. The holograms aligned like a constellation of interconnected symbols. "Don't touch anything," Nolan shouted, pulling her back. But it was too late. The entire structure seemed to react to Lila's touch. A deep, resonant sound reverberated, like the roar of something colossal awakening from a long slumber. The walls around them began to shift, forming new corridors and closing off others, as if the place was reconfiguring itself to guide the crew somewhere. "We're being led," said Alara. "Whatever this is, it wants us to see something." As the team cautiously moved through the constantly changing corridors, the environment around them grew more oppressive. The walls vibrated with a low hum, synchronized with the heartbeat of each crew member. In the distance, indistinct whispers could be heard, as if voices were trying to communicate something but spoke in an entirely alien language. After nearly an hour of walking, the crew reached a vast central chamber. In the middle of the room floated a bright core of light, so intense it was difficult to look directly at it. The core seemed to consist of thousands of small fragments, all orbiting in complex patterns. Around the room, massive obelisks stood, etched with inscriptions, that glowed intermittently. "These symbols," said Lila, stepping closer to one of the obelisks. "I've seen something like this in the classified files we studied before leaving. They're ancient, very ancient. But there's more. Something that connects this to us." Suddenly, the voice returned, clearer and more focused this time. "You are the descendants. The hands that shaped this universe were not human, yet you were chosen to continue the cycle. However, you have failed to preserve balance. Judgment will be fair." "Who are you?" Nolan shouted, pointing his weapon at the core, though he knew it was futile. "Why did you bring us here? What do you want from us?" The core pulsed with light, and a figure emerged. It was humanoid but composed entirely of light and shadow interwoven together. Its movements were fluid, almost as if it floated. "We are the Guardians. We were created to protect the balance between the forces of the universe. You humans have encountered fragments of our legacy and used them for war, greed, and destruction. This must end." The crew fell silent. The words echoed in their minds, bringing forth memories of their own failures. Alara tried to reason. "We don't know what you're talking about. We came here only to investigate. We had no intention of causing harm." "Every action has its consequences," the Guardian replied. "You are part of something much greater, yet you have ignored the warnings. Humanity has known of our legacy since it began exploring space. The fragments you discovered were used to fuel wars and empower empires. This must stop." "Fragments?" asked Aiko. "You're saying there are more of these? That this is part of something bigger?" The Guardian raised one hand, and holograms began to appear around them. They showed images of other worlds, other civilizations that had come into contact with similar structures. Some had flourished, while others had been destroyed. Each fragment is a key. Each key opens a portal to knowledge that transcends time and space. But with great power comes great responsibility. Many failed to understand this. As the Guardian spoke, the core began to pulse irregularly. Lila noticed something strange in the patterns of light around them. These symbols. They're not just a language. They're a countdown. "A countdown to what?" asked Nolan, stepping closer to her. "To collapse," replied the Guardian. "If humanity cannot prove itself ready, this fragment will be destroyed, along with all who are connected to it. The cycle must be preserved." Tension filled the room. Nolan turned to Alara. "We need a plan. We can't just stand here and wait for something to happen." Alara looked at the core, trying to find a solution. "Maybe we can stabilize the core. If we show that we can control its energy, perhaps that will prove we're worthy." "Or maybe it'll kill us faster," Aiko muttered, adjusting his suit's controls. Before they could decide, the core emitted a piercing sound. The obelisks, Around it lit up, projecting beams of light that formed a circle around the team. The Guardian spoke again. "The choice is yours. Prove your worth or accept the end." Lila stepped forward, her gaze fixed on the pulsating core. "I'll do it," she said firmly, her voice cutting through the chaos. Everyone turned to her in shock. "Lila, no!" Ilara protested, reaching out to stop her. "We don't know what this means. You can't just—" "I have to," Lila interrupted, her tone resolute. "When I touched the obelisk earlier, I felt something like a connection. Maybe that's why we were brought here. Maybe it was always supposed to be me." "You don't know that," Nolan argued, his voice filled with anger and fear. "We'll find another way. We always do." But Lila shook her head. "If we wait any longer, there won't be another way. You've seen the countdown. We don't have time for debates." She looked at each of them, her expression softening. "You need to get out of here. Take the data. Warn Earth. Whatever happens, make sure this isn't for nothing." Before anyone could stop her, Lila turned and walked toward the core. The light around it intensified, forming a barrier that prevented the others from following her. Nolan slammed his fist against the invisible wall, shouting her name, but Lila didn't look back. She placed her hand on the core, and a blinding wave of energy engulfed the room. When the light subsided, the core was stable, its pulsations now rhythmic and calm. The obelisks dimmed, and the chaotic vibrations ceased. But Lila was gone. The Guardian's voice echoed through the chamber. "The sacrifice has been made. The balance has been restored. You must leave now." The walls around them began to shift again, opening a path back to the entrance. Nolan hesitated, his fists clenched, but Ilara pulled him back. "We can't waste this. Lila did this for us, for everyone." Reluctantly, Nolan followed as the team made their way out of the monolith. The structure trembled as if preparing to collapse, but the crew managed to reach the ecliptica in time. Once aboard, they discovered that all systems had been restored, and the gravitational field around the monolith had dissipated. Nolan took the controls, piloting the ship away from the structure. Through the observation window, they watched as the monolith folded in on itself, disappearing in a burst of light. Silence returned to the void of space. Inside the ecliptica, the crew sat in stunned silence. Ilara clutched a small recording device that Lila had left behind, her fingers trembling as she activated it. Lila's voice played, calm but resolute. "If you're hearing this, it means we did what we had to. You have to make sure this story doesn't end here. The truth about what we found, what we unleashed, it belongs to the world." Ilara's hands shook as she stopped the recording. "She knew," she whispered. "She knew this wasn't just about us." Nolan leaned against the console, his expression grim. "The NASA command is going to bury this. They'll classify everything, just like they've always done." "Not if we don't let them," Ilara said, her voice steady now. "We have the data. We can tell people what happened. And who's going to believe us?" Iko asked, his tone bitter. "We activated an alien network, lost one of our own, and barely escaped with our lives. They'll call it a failed mission and silence anyone who speaks out." Ilara looked at both of them, determination in her eyes. "Then we don't give them the chance. We broadcast everything. The data, the images, Lila's message. We send it to every independent network, every scientist who'll listen. This is bigger than us." Before they could act, an alert sounded on the ship's console. A new signal was being received, stronger and more coherent than the chaotic transmissions they'd encountered before. Nolan opened the communication channel and the Guardian's voice returned. "The cycle continues. The balance has been restored in this fragment, but others remain unstable. You carry the knowledge. To prevent further collapse, use it wisely." On the console, a map of the galaxy appeared, marked with points indicating the locations of other fragments. Ilara stared at it, realization dawning. This wasn't just about one fragment. It's all connected. The network spans the entire galaxy. And if we don't do something, it'll all fall apart, Nolan said grimly. He turned to the crew. We have a choice to make. Do we return to Earth and hand this over to people who might hide it again? Or do we follow the map and finish what we started? Silence filled the room as they contemplated the weight of the decision. Finally, Ilara spoke. If we don't do it, who will? This is our responsibility now. Nolan nodded. Then let's finish it. The Ecliptica set its course for the first marked point on the map. As the ship's engines roared to life, the crew knew they were embarking on a journey that could change the fate of humanity, and perhaps the galaxy itself. The stakes were higher than ever, but they carried with them the hope that their sacrifices would mean something.